Millionaire CEO sees four street girls, 9 years old, identical to the ex-wife he expelled 10 years ago. This one's about lost time, second chances, and the unbreakable bonds we never saw coming. Before we dive into the story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Now let's begin. The black Lincoln Navigator rolled to a smooth stop at the corner of Fifth Avenue, its tinted windows catching fragments of neon signs and holiday decor just beginning to appear in Manhattan's chilled November air. Inside the car, Nathaniel Nate Bradford exhaled slowly. The tie at his throat loosened just enough to suggest triumph, not fatigue. He glanced down at his phone. 5 missed calls, a dozen messages, all congratulations. The Kaizen Tech acquisition had closed just after dawn. 2 years of negotiation, 45 hours of nonstop due diligence, and now it was his. Another billion-dollar empire absorbed into the ever-expanding network of Bradford Holdings. The markets would roar, investors would feast. And yet, Nate felt none of the usual satisfaction. His driver, James, glanced at him in the mirror. "Would you like the tunnel back to the tower?" Sir Nate didn't answer right away. He was staring out the window, watching a cluster of pedestrians shuffle past in their heavy coats, noses pink from the cold. For a moment he envied them, their anonymity, their simple purposes. He could almost forget who he was. "No," he said quietly. "Drop me here, I'll walk." James raised an eyebrow but nodded. Moments later, Nate stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold air biting at his collar. A doorman from the plaza tipped his cap with practiced grace. Nate barely noticed. At 52, he cut an imposing figure, tall and clean-cut with silver streaking his dark hair and the kind of gaze that made competitors nervous. His tailored wool coat fit like armor, but today it did little to shield him from the unease prickling beneath his skin. He walked, letting his legs carry him without destination. The wind pushed past the buildings like whispered warnings, rustling the leaves that clung desperately to the trees. His mind, as always, tried to fill the silence with work. Stockholder reports, merger, logistics, the inevitable press conferences. But beneath all that noise, a quieter thought pressed against his chest. He didn't know what it was, only that it had weight, and that it had been growing for some time. The crosswalk light changed. Nate stepped off the curb. He glanced at his watch, 40 minutes until the board meeting, and began to cross with the crowd. That's when he saw them. 4 girls stood on the opposite sidewalk, their small frames huddled close together beside a row of plastic buckets filled with flowers. They looked to be about 9 years old, their winter coats mismatched and worn, scarves too big for their faces, gloves with frayed fingertips. They moved with silent coordination, rearranging the bouquets of carnations, daisies, and eucalyptus stems with surprising care. At their feet, a cardboard sign leaned against a bucket. Flowers for hope. $5. Nate might have walked past them. Should have, really. He never stopped for vendors, but something made him pause. A flicker of something in the posture of one of the girls, a proud tilt of the chin, the sharp line of her cheekbones, the way she scanned the street like she'd seen this all before. And then she looked up. Her eyes met his blue glacial, arresting. And everything around him, cars, horns whined. People fell away. Not just one girl, four identical faces, quadruplets, each with the same high cheekbones, the same strong jawline, the same piercing blue eyes that had marked the Bradford bloodline for generations. His heart stuttered, his feet stopped moving. The girl who had first spotted him leaned toward her sister and whispered something. One by one the others turned their heads toward him, and just like that, he was staring into a mirror fractured 4 times. He couldn't breathe. Then, as if fate were toying with him, one of them, smaller with a missing front tooth, stepped forward and held out a flower wrapped in tissue. "Would you like to buy one?" she asked sweetly. "They're $5. Her voice. It was small and light, but something in it. Something pure and melodic carried a note he hadn't heard in 10 years. Audrey's voice. Not the words, not even the tone. Just the rhythm. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. With trembling hands, he pulled it out. Mr. Bradford, came his assistant's voice, anxious. The board is asking if you'll be on time. He didn't answer her. He couldn't, sir. I'll call you back. He managed and ended the call. He crouched slightly to the little girl's level. What's your name, Ellie? She said. These are my sisters, Leah, Sadie, and Zoe. His lips parted, but no sound came. Ellie. The name wasn't familiar, but somehow it still felt right. Then the smallest one, Zoe, he assumed, pulled at Ellie's coat. We have to go, she whispered. Maggie will get worried. And just like that, the girls began packing up. The bouquet buckets were lifted, the flowers stacked. They moved like they'd done this 100 times. In less than a minute, they were gone, disappearing into the Manhattan crowd like petals in the wind. Nate stood there, bouquet in hand, briefcase forgotten at his feet. 10 years ago, Audrey had stood in his penthouse, hands resting on a nearly invisible curve at her waist. It's a miracle, Nate, she'd said. I know what the doctor said, but these are ours. He had laughed. Not kindly. They told me I was sterile. Are you really asking me to believe this? She had left the next morning. Now, 10 years later, her eyes had just looked back at him, through 4 little girls standing on a freezing street corner, and everything he'd built since that day suddenly felt like ash. The grandfather clock in Nathaniel Bradford's penthouse struck midnight, each chime a heavy drumbeat reverberating through 4,000 square feet of polished emptiness. The penthouse, perched high above Central Park, was a masterpiece of architectural precision. Glass walls, sculpted lighting, custom furniture imported from Milan. Every surface gleamed, untouched, impersonal. It was a kingdom built not for comfort, but for control. Nate stood at the vast window, a glass of untouched scotch in hand, watching the city shimmer like a galaxy turned on its side. Yellow taxis moved like fireflies through the grid. Somewhere down there on some side street or tiny shared bunk, 4 little girls were sleeping. Or maybe they weren't. Maybe they were still out selling flowers beneath street lamps. The thought hollowed his chest. He hadn't spoken since returning home, not even to James. His coat still hung on the doorknob. His tie lay draped across the floor like a snake that had shed its skin. Everything felt suspended, heavy, unreal. He couldn't get their faces out of his head. The way Ellie had tilted her chin. How Zoe's eyes had flickered upward like she was trying to read his heart. How each of them wore Audrey's softness over a blueprint. Unmistakably, Bradford, impossible. He whispered, his breath fogging the glass. And yet, not really. The past 10 years unfurled behind his eyes like a film on mute. He turned from the window and crossed the marble floor toward his office. The sound of his footsteps echoed louder than expected. In the corner behind a set of locked drawers, he retrieved an old leather box, the one he hadn't opened since Audrey left. Its key had been taped to the back of a photo frame, untouched, almost forgotten. His fingers hesitated over the lid, then slowly, he lifted it open. Inside lay a time capsule. Brittle photographs, an ivory envelope with happy anniversary in Audrey's handwriting, a dried lavender sprig from a weekend trip to Provence, a tarnished charm from a bracelet he'd once given her, his initials engraved alongside hers, and beneath it all, their wedding photo. Audrey, radiant in ivory silk, stood barefoot on a balcony overlooking the sea. Her chestnut hair had been pinned loosely, strands dancing in the wind. Her green eyes held so much joy, it hurt to look at them now. And beside her, a younger version of himself, smiling, unarmored, deeply in love. Nate sat back in his leather chair and let the silence close around him. He remembered that final night with punishing clarity. Audrey had stood in this very room, her back to the city, hands resting protectively over her belly. "It's a miracle, Nate," she'd said, voice fragile but fierce. "I know what the doctors told you, but I'm pregnant. I took 3 tests. We're having a baby. Babies." He remembered the knot in his stomach, the cold crawl of disbelief. "We've seen every specialist in the tri-state area. I'm sterile. That's not a maybe. It's a fact." Audrey's eyes had shimmered, but she didn't back down. They were wrong. He hadn't even raised his voice, just looked her dead in the eye and asked, "Whose children are they?" "Audrey." The silence that followed had been louder than any scream. The next morning she was gone. No note, no explanations, just her wedding ring left glinting on the marble nightstand like a final period in a sentence she never got to finish. He'd told himself she had betrayed him, that she wanted a slice of his wealth, his name. Claudia had said as much. She was never right for you, his sister had insisted. Too sentimental, too unstable. She was probably bored. Claudia had reinforced every suspicion like it was her duty. Slipping articles under his office door reports about women falsifying paternity claims, Nate, shattered and humiliated, had clung to those narratives like a lifeline. But now he'd seen 4 girls with his eyes and her smile, and everything he thought he knew began to disintegrate. He picked up his phone, fingers hovering. Audrey's number was long disconnected. He didn't even know where she was. He called his head of security instead. "Miles," he said, his voice gravel, "I need you to find someone. Urgently." There was a pause. "Who are we looking for, sir? 4 girls? 9, maybe 10. Identical blue eyes. Selling flowers near 5th and 53rd? Another pause. "You think they're yes. And I need you to find their mother, Audrey Bennett." He hung up before questions could follow. Then he turned back toward the window. The skyline sparkled like diamonds against black silk, but it no longer impressed him. It was the kingdom he'd built on top of ruins. All this time he'd measured his worth in square footage, shareholder returns, Forbes covers. But in 10 seconds on a city sidewalk, 4 little girls had shaken his entire foundation. He couldn't shake the image of Ellie's bouquet in her small, gloveless hands, the frost blooming on the edges of her sleeves. The silent urgency in Zoe's voice when she said Maggie will worry Maggie. Was that their grandmother, a shelter volunteer? Whoever she was, she had done more for them in one winter than Nate had in 10 years. His stomach twisted. He thought of what they must have endured. Audrey alone pregnant. Broke 4 babies to raise rent food. No support from the man who had sworn to protect her, the man who had called her a liar. He stood there for a long time, unmoving. The scotch still sat on the windowsill full. Eventually, he whispered more to himself than to the empty room. "I have to find them." Tomorrow he would go back to that corner and wait as long as it took, because if those girls were his, if even one of them was, then he had already missed 10 birthdays, and he wasn't about to miss another. By dawn, the next morning, Nathaniel Bradford was already pacing near the corner of 5th and 53rd, the bitter wind slipping beneath his coat like punishment. His bespoke shoes, inappropriate for standing this long, had already lost their shine. His phone buzzed every few minutes, messages from Diane, pings from his investor thread, even a calendar alert reminding him to confirm attendance for an award ceremony at the Yale Club. He ignored them all. The street around him yawned to life in slow pulses, bakeries pulling open their shutters, delivery trucks hissing to curbs, pedestrians wrapped in scarves clutching coffee like lifelines. Nate stayed still, shoulders hunched, eyes trained on every child who passed. But they didn't come. No Ellie, no Leah, no Sadie, no Zoe, just an ever-churning river of strangers. He stood there for over 3 hours, his face numb, his confidence unraveling. Perhaps yesterday had been a fluke. Perhaps they sold only on weekends. Perhaps, God forbid, they'd moved on. He was about to leave when a flicker of movement caught his eye, a girl in a lavender scarf weaving through the crowd, then another, 2 more behind them, 4 small figures in mismatched coats. He froze. There they were. The girls emerged from the subway stairs across the avenue carrying their plastic buckets with practiced ease. They walked in a tight cluster, almost like a single organism with 4 heads and 8 legs. He felt his breath catch. They were even smaller than he remembered. This time he didn't rush. He lingered behind a newsstand watching as they set up their bouquets. Ellie gave instructions softly. Leah knelt to adjust the floral tissue. Sadie kept her eyes on the street like a little bodyguard. Zoe twirled a ribbon between her fingers, whispering to herself. Nate felt something rise in his chest, a strange, aching awe. They had no idea they were being observed by a man who had once sent their mother away, who had by omission left them to fend for themselves. Yet they moved with grace, efficiency, even joy. Then something happened. A hurried businessman clipped one of the buckets with his briefcase. The container toppled. Water spilled across the sidewalk, soaking the flowers and one of Zoe's boots. The man didn't stop. Zoe's eyes filled instantly, but she didn't cry. She just looked down at her soaked sock like it was something she'd expected to happen. Nate stepped forward, instinct surging, but stopped himself. He wasn't ready. Not yet. This was still observation, not reunion. He watched as Sadie moved to Zoe's side, whispering something only sisters would know. Leah and Ellie salvaged what they could, wringing out the stems and reshuffling them into new arrangements. No drama, no tears, just resilience. He couldn't believe it. These were his daughters, his blood, and they were extraordinary. By 2 p.m, traffic had thinned and the girls began packing up. Nate followed them, careful, deliberate, several paces behind. They headed west through neighborhoods that shifted from gleaming storefronts to graffiti-tagged bodegas. The city changed around them. The air grew thicker, the buildings older, the sidewalks uneven. In Chelsea, they stopped at a corner deli. Nate waded across the street. Heart-pounding, Ellie pulled a wad of crumpled bills from her coat pocket and counted carefully before ordering a sandwich. 1 sandwich. They stepped outside, and sitting on a concrete ledge, divided it into 4 even parts. Nate looked away, blinking hard. He followed again as they turned south into the Lower East Side. After 15 more minutes of walking, they stopped in front of a building tucked between 2 pawn shops. The structure sagged slightly, like it was tired of holding itself up. Rusted bars covered the windows. A faded sign above the door read, "Starlight Haven Shelter. Women and children. Welcome." A gray-haired woman in a quilted vest opened the door before the girls even knocked. Her arms opened wide as the children rushed into them, and Nate's throat constricted as he watched them press their faces to her chest, 4 to 1, in a familiar embrace. Then the door closed, and he was alone again. His phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but answered instinctively. Mr. Bradford came Miles's voice, crisp but breathless. "I've located Audrey Bennett." Nate's hand tightened around the phone. "Where is she?" "Rikers Island." The name dropped like a stone in his chest. "Arrested 4 months ago. Petty theft. She stole groceries, peanut butter formula, sandwich bread. No weapon, no violence, just desperation." Nate didn't speak. "She's serving a 6-month sentence. Maximum term. No priors." It was her first offense. He felt as if he were falling through the floor. What about the girls? They're in temporary custody. The woman you saw, Margaret Holloway, a retired social worker, is caring for them at the shelter. She took them in when no one else would. Nate stared up at the building. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That'll be all for now." He crossed the street. The lobby was barely more than a hallway. A corkboard near the entrance was cluttered with donation drives and missing persons flyers. A smell of soup and bleach hung in the air. He rang the bell at the front desk. Moments later, the woman from the doorway appeared, stern-weathered, capable. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyes narrowing as she took in his tailored coat and expensive boots. "I hope so," Nate said, extending a hand. "I'm Nathan. I recently stepped back from the tech world. Thought I'd use the extra time to volunteer. Give back." She didn't take his hand right away. "We don't get many executives," she said evenly. "And we're not exactly a photo op operation. I'm not here for photos." She studied him. "You know the girls, don't you? I saw them yesterday. Then again today, I couldn't stop thinking about them." The woman sighed and motioned him inside. "I'm Maggie. I run Starlight. We take whoever the system forgets." He followed her into a small office lit by a single desk lamp and a string of holiday lights taped to the bulletin board. The room was full of files, snack wrappers, and soft chaos. She gestured to a folding chair. "You want to help? Fine. We need kitchen help, tutoring, light repairs, overnight monitoring, whatever you're not too proud to do." "I'm not too proud," Nate said. Maggie eyed him, then softened slightly. "The flower girls. That's what everyone calls them." Their mother Audrey was a fighter, worked 3 jobs, made the girls' lives magical even when she had nothing. Nate swallowed hard. They stayed afloat until COVID hit. Audrey lost everything. They got evicted. She stole food. The judge didn't care. Called it opportunistic crime. Gave her the full 6 months. Nate was silent. "The girls are special," Maggie said. "They're not just surviving. They're shining. Ellie is like a General Sadie's the protector. Leah's got an artist's soul." "And Zoe?" She trailed off. "Zoe still believes her mom will walk through that door tomorrow." "She will," Nate said quietly. Soon Maggie narrowed her eyes. "How would you know that I have connections?" he replied. "And I plan to use every one of them." She crossed her arms. "You're not who you say you are you?" He looked her in the eye. "Not entirely, but I mean what I said. I want to help." Maggie glanced toward the hallway where the girls' laughter echoed faintly. "They don't trust easily. They've been through too much. You hurt them, and I'll personally make sure you regret it." "I won't." A beat passed. "You want in?" She asked. "Dinner shift starts in 10 minutes. Nate stood. "Where's the apron?" The kitchen at Starlight Haven wasn't much cracked linoleum floors, a refrigerator that hummed like it was gasping for breath, and steel counters scrubbed to a shine that couldn't quite erase years of wear. But the scent of simmering lentil soup gave the room an unexpected warmth. Nathaniel Bradford stood at the entrance, suddenly unsure of himself. The designer coat was gone, replaced with an apron, 2 sizes too small, and sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He had spent the last 20 minutes chopping carrots beside a college-aged volunteer who didn't recognize him, thank God, and was now facing the moment he both dreaded and longed for. There in the kitchen's far corner stood the 4 girls, Ellie, Leah, Sadie, and Zoe. They wore oversized aprons that dragged at their ankles, rolled and nodded to stay in place. Ellie ladled soup with clinical precision. Leah arranged plastic bowls on a tray, each one facing exactly the same direction. Sadie kept glancing toward the hallway as if expecting trouble. Zoe, the smallest, sang quietly under her breath, a half-tune, half-whisper melody that didn't seem to follow any real song. Maggie appeared beside him with a dishcloth slung over one shoulder. "Keep your voice gentle. No sudden moves. They'll decide in 10 seconds if they like you or not," she whispered. Nate gave a shaky nod. "Got it." Maggie crossed the kitchen, her voice raised just enough. "Girls, we have a new helper tonight. This is Mr. Nathan. He's volunteering for a while." 4 heads turned in perfect synchronization. 4 pairs of ice blue eyes locked onto his face. They recognized him. He felt it. Ellie's expression was unreadable, intelligent, guarded. Leah tilted her head, curious but silent. Sadie's arms crossed instantly, her body shifting subtly to place herself in front of Zoe. And Zoe, half behind her sister, peeked out and offered a blink more than a stare. "Hi," Nate said, forcing a small smile. "I'm glad to be here. Let me know how I can help." No one spoke. Ellie returned to her ladle. Leah handed out bowls. Sadie resumed her post as silent sentry. Zoe, though, kept watching. Maggie cleared her throat gently. "Nathan's learning the ropes. But I figured the best place to start is with the experts." Ellie glanced at him. "Can you carry heavy stuff?" He blinked. "I think so." "Then you carry the water cooler." "Refills," she said, jerking her chin toward the back pantry. "We're always low." Nate obeyed like a soldier assigned a task. He returned moments later. 2-gallon jugs in hand, his sleeves rolled further up his forearms now. Leah looked at his wrists, then at her own, matching bone structure, similar knuckles. He caught her staring and smiled, but she looked away. During dinner service, he stayed quiet, taking his cues from the girls. When one child spilled juice, Zoe darted forward with a rag before Maggie could even move. Nate reached to help, but Zoe shot him a brief look, a warning not of fear but of independence. She had it handled. By the end of the shift, the quadruplets had said no more than a handful of words to him. but their eyes had studied him like scientists with a strange new specimen. He couldn't blame them. Their lives had been shaped by absence, not comfort. Trust wasn't given. It was earned in layers. Back in the hallway, Nate peeled off his apron and stood beside Maggie as she wiped down a bulletin board cluttered with drawings. "I survived," he murmured. Maggie didn't look up. "Barely there." "Remarkable," he said. "Sharp, disciplined, and hurting." Maggie added, "Don't mistake composure for peace. They've built walls so high they sometimes forget there's anything on the other side." He nodded. "I saw Leah looking at your hands." She added, "They all notice more than they say." He glanced down, his fingers, the same slender, bony shape as the girl's. Ellie's eyes, Zoe's chin, Leah's quiet artistry, Sadie's ferocity, all echoes of him, and more so of Audrey. "They don't know who I am," he said. "Not yet," Maggie replied. "But they suspect." He didn't sleep that night. The couch in his penthouse living room remained unslept in the untouched scotch, sweating on the marble table. He sat at the piano instead, an antique Steinway that hadn't been played since Audrey left. The keys were colder than he remembered. When dawn broke, he was already halfway through the legal documents Helena Kingsley had sent him. Temporary guardianship, custodial advocacy, visitation extensions, and the petition to reduce Audrey's sentence. He didn't hesitate. He signed every page. Later that morning, he returned to the shelter with fresh produce flowers and on impulse a new faucet for the staff bathroom. By noon, he was on his knees with a wrench while Zoe watched silently from the doorway clutching a plush giraffe whose stuffing peeked from one arm. He looked up and smiled. "Fixing leaks, my new specialty." She stepped closer. "You look different today, do I?" She nodded solemnly, happier, like someone who remembers a nice dream. He set the wrench down slowly. "What's your giraffe's name?" "Peanut," she whispered. "That's a good name." She studied him. "Do you have kids?" The question struck so directly, it felt rehearsed. He answered carefully. "I might." Zoe's brows furrowed. "How can you not know?" "Because I made a mistake a long time ago." "A big one." She seemed to accept that. "Mom says grown-ups make mistakes that make little people sad." He felt his chest tighten. She's right. Zoe placed Peanut on the floor beside his toolbox, her eyes still fixed on his face. "Do you want us to like you?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Then you have to carry the buckets every day. Even when it rains, I will." She nodded. "Okay, then." The next morning, Nate arrived at 6:45 a.m. sharp. He wore his flower uniform now, jeans, boots, and the same windbreaker Maggie had given him the day he'd first unloaded donations. The girls said little as he joined them, but they didn't protest either. That was progress. They rode the subway together. Nate stood near the door while the girls claimed a corner seat, curling into each other like a cluster of petals in a storm. At one stop, a tourist tripped and nearly crushed their bucket. Nate caught it mid-air, setting it down gently. "Reflexes," Sadie muttered. "Not bad." At the corner of 5th and 53rd, they unpacked their bouquets with rhythmic coordination. Nate took instructions from Ellie without protest. He carried arranged and stood still when needed. Around noon, as a lull passed through the crowd, a customer dropped her bouquet. Flowers scattered. Nate dropped to a crouch, collecting stems with care. When he looked up, Sadie was staring at him. Something unreadable in her gaze. "You really don't know how to do this," she said flatly. "I'm learning. Most grown-ups don't care enough to learn." He handed her the last stem. "I care." Sadie didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. Later, Zoe approached quietly with a single daisy in hand. "For your room," she said, "so you don't forget the flower rules." He took it like a fragile gift, his throat too tight for thanks. That night, back at the penthouse, the daisy sat alone in a crystal glass on the windowsill. Beneath it, he wrote a name on the back of an envelope. Zoe, life 1 name down, 3 more to go. Rain had slicked the Manhattan sidewalks into a glistening mosaic by late afternoon. Cars hissed past, umbrellas collided like sparring swords, and the air carried that sharp city scent, half coffee, half diesel. Nathaniel Bradford stood by the flower stand at 5th and 53rd, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, watching 4 small figures move with practiced coordination. Ellie barked quiet orders. Leah arranged the new bouquets with artistic care. Sadie scanned the street alert. As always, Zoe hummed again. Always humming, as if the sound kept something dark at bay. Nate knew his place now. He wasn't a savior. He was a bucket carrier, a space maker. He held the tape dispenser. He fetched the lunch bag. He listened when they spoke, even when it wasn't to him, and yet he still wasn't prepared for what happened next. A woman in a rush, mid-40s, distracted by her phone, bumped the stand and knocked over 2 bouquets. Stems scattered across the wet concrete. Zoe gasped. "Sorry." The woman tossed over her shoulder, already gone. Nate dropped to one knee, gathering flowers. The girls joined him, Ellie snatching carnations off the curb with speed and grace. Then it happened. Sadie froze mid-reach. Her eyes locked on Nate. Not just on him, but into him. "You have our eyes," she said quietly. The words were so soft they could have been missed, but Ellie heard. Leah straightened. Zoe's humming stopped. Nate stayed still, kneeling with a bouquet in hand, heart suddenly pounding so loudly he couldn't hear the traffic anymore. Sadie took a small step forward, her brow furrowed in a way that mirrored his own. "The shape," she said, "the color, even the way they squint when it's too bright." Zoe moved beside her, like the pictures Mom keeps of her husband. Ellie's head snapped toward them. "The box," she said slowly. "Mom's special box under the bed." Nate rose to his feet. Slowly, flowers still in his hands. Leah's voice broke the silence next. "You know her, don't you?" He met their gazes, all 4 pairs of blue eyes, his eyes searching him now, not just for truth, for answers. "I do," he said, his voice barely above the rain. Sadie crossed her arms. "So who are you really, Mr. Nathan?" There it was. The moment he'd rehearsed 100 times in front of the mirror. The moment that terrified him more than boardroom failures or family implosions. The moment the walls cracked. "I'm just someone who wants to help," he said. The disappointment was visible. Leah looked down. Ellie's jaw clenched. Zoe stepped back. "Wrong answer," Sadie said, her voice sharp. Nate closed his eyes for half a second. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean. You always look sad when you think we're not watching." Leah said suddenly. He opened his eyes. "You watch us," Ellie added, not in a creepy way, just like you're trying to remember something. Nate swallowed. "I watch because I'm learning who you are." Sadie tilted her head. "And what have you learned? That you're smart, that you're brave, that you protect each other." "That's not learning," Ellie snapped. "That's observing." Zoe, quiet until now, looked up. "Do you miss someone?" Nate blinked. "Yes." "Who?" she asked, and her voice was so soft, so pure that he couldn't lie. "Your mom," he said. "I miss your mom." Silence. Then Ellie stepped forward slowly, deliberately. From the bucket behind her, she plucked a daisy, half-wilted, unevenly trimmed, and held it out. "This one's free," she said. For remembering her, Nate took it carefully. The daisy wasn't perfect, but it was real, a peace offering, a clue, a question wrapped in petals. Back at the shelter that evening, the rain still tapped against the windows in rhythmic defiance. The girls sat at a side table quietly doing homework, while Maggie and Nate washed dishes side by side. "You're not hiding it very well," Maggie said without looking up. "What the weight you're carrying. Whatever secret you think you're holding like a glass of water behind your back, it's leaking." Nate rinsed a bowl in silence. "They're asking questions," Maggie said, more directly. "Now I know. What are you waiting for? Permission from Audrey? From myself? I don't know." Maggie dried her hands. "You've been a constant in their lives for 6 weeks. That's more than most people give them in a lifetime." He nodded. "Just don't let the silence speak for you. It already did once. And look where that led." Later that night, As the girls prepared for bed, Ellie stayed behind to help Maggie tally receipts from their flower sales. Nate lingered folding laundry in the corner like a well-trained assistant. "You didn't ask for this," Ellie said without turning. "Ask for what? Us, all of us. We're a lot." Nate paused. "I didn't ask for it, but I wouldn't change it." Ellie turned her gaze sharp. "Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts." She nodded. Once, then went to join her sisters. In his penthouse that night, Nate stared at the daisy on his windowsill. It hadn't wilted. Not yet. He traced its petals like Braille, reading a language he was only just beginning to understand. That night, for the first time in a decade, he didn't dream of buildings falling or empires crumbling. He dreamed of 4 girls with blue eyes and a door he finally opened. The wind shifted that morning, less bitter, more brittle. It carried the scent of thawing pavement and something faintly sweet from the bakery down the block. Nathaniel sat in a quiet cafe a few streets from the shelter, steam rising from the untouched coffee in front of him. His hands rested on the table, fingers interlaced knuckles, white across from him. Margaret Holloway. Maggie set a thick manila envelope on the table between them. "You said we needed to talk," she said. "So here it is." Nate stared at the envelope. His name, or rather the one he'd used Nathan, was written in Audrey's handwriting. It wasn't the loopy, artistic scrawl of a teenager in love. It was steadier now, shaped by years of budgeting bedtime routines and survival. "I've been sitting on this for weeks," Maggie said. "I told myself I'd give you time. Let you show who you are without the weight of the past. But the girls, they're asking questions now. You're in their lives, and whether you mean to or not, you're already changing them." Nate nodded slowly. "I don't want to hurt them or confuse them." "Then stop hiding," she said gently. "From them. From her. From yourself." He reached for the envelope and opened it carefully, as if afraid it might vanish if handled too roughly. Inside were letters, dozens. Some dated as far back as 10 years ago. Others more recent, some addressed to him personally, others to various divisions of Bradford Holdings. All bore return addresses Audrey had used over the years, rented mailboxes, shelters, apartments that probably no longer existed. He unfolded the first letter. The date was circled in the corner. March 19th, 2015. "Nathaniel, I know you probably won't read this. I don't even know if this address still works. But I'm writing anyway, because if there's even a 1% chance these words reach you, I have to try. I gave birth to 4 girls. 4, I named them Ellie, Leah, Sadie, and Zoe. They're miracles. Nate, yours, I swear it. They have your eyes. The exact same blue. Sometimes when Ellie scrunches her forehead in frustration, I swear, I see you. I don't want money. I want you to know they exist, that they're real, that I'm trying my best, but it's hard. So hard. And they ask about you sometimes. They don't know your name, but they ask, where's the other half? I don't know how to answer that." Audrey Nate's hand trembled as he set it down. He opened another, this one from 2018. It had been forwarded twice, judging by the postmarks. "I'm writing again, even though I told myself I wouldn't. Sadie broke her arm last week. She slipped in the snow. We were walking back from the bodega with canned soup and cereal. I was carrying Zoe and groceries. I looked away for 2 seconds. No insurance. The hospital discharged us in 6 hours. I begged them to be gentle. She didn't cry. She said, 'It doesn't hurt. Not when Mommy's holding my hand. She's so brave, all of them are.' You don't know them, Nate. But if you did, you'd love them. They're you and they're me. And I still don't know why you never wrote back." Audrey. He felt like he couldn't breathe. Each letter was a door to a world he had never entered, a timeline he had denied, a life he could have had. Where did these come from? He asked, barely above a whisper. Maggie took a sip of her tea, watching him carefully. Audrey kept copies. She used to mail the originals from wherever she lived. I watched her walk blocks out of her way to find the right post office, thinking maybe it increased the chances. She said she left without a word, that she walked out. She did walk out, because you gave her no reason to stay, but she never stopped trying to reach you. I never received a single letter. Maggie nodded. That's what she always suspected, especially when the ones she mailed to your office got returned unopened, labeled refused or undeliverable. He ran a hand down his face, trying to push away the burning behind his eyes. I hired someone, he said slowly. A private security firm. They're still investigating Claudia's involvement in everything. Maggie's eyes darkened. Audrey always said your sister hated her. She did. I just didn't think she'd go this far. There was another paper tucked into the envelope. Not a letter, but a photograph. Folded once faded at the corners. Audrey in a hospital bed. Exhausted. Elated. And in her arms, 4 impossibly tiny infants, each wrapped in a hospital-issued blanket, their faces barely visible but already hauntingly familiar. On the back scrawled in Audrey's hand, the Bradford girls Ellie, Leah, Sadie, and Zoe tell their father they're waiting. Nate pressed the photo to his chest, squeezing his eyes shut. When he finally looked up, Maggie's voice was softer. You can't change the past, Nathaniel, but you have a chance now. A real one. He nodded. I want to tell them the truth. He said you should. Maggie agreed. They're ready. He gathered the letters into the envelope, handling them like precious artifacts. Thank you, he said, voice breaking, for keeping these safe, for keeping them safe. Maggie gave a quiet smile. They've always had someone looking out for them. As Nate stood and walked into the rain, the envelope held tight against his chest, he felt the weight of 10 years pressing down on him, but he also felt the first stirring of release, because now finally he had proof not just of Audrey's faith or his daughter's existence, but of a truth too long buried beneath pride and silence, a truth written not in legal files or medical records, but in ink and longing, in the stubborn handwriting of a mother who never gave up. And now it was time he stopped giving up too. The next morning broke with a pale golden haze, the kind New York offered rarely, and only to those awake early enough to notice sunlight filtered through the windows of Starlight Haven, casting soft stripes across the linoleum floors of the common room. The shelter was quiet, the hush that lives between breakfast and bustle. Nathaniel Bradford stood by the long folding table where the girls kept their supplies, buckets, scissors, twine, old newspapers, the last of the wild daisies, and discount carnations. He had come early carrying something wrapped in brown butcher paper and bound with ribbon. Maggie raised an eyebrow when he arrived, but said nothing, only pointed toward the back where the girls would eventually come to work. He unwrapped the bundle slowly. Inside was a flower press handcrafted mahogany lined with parchment and brass screws. He set it down beside the buckets, adjusting its placement as if arranging a gift for royalty. A folded note rested on top for saving what matters most. He wasn't sure what the girls would do with it. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But it was more than a gift. It was an offering. A gesture from a man learning to speak without defense, without agenda. A promise in petals. He didn't wait to see their reaction. Instead, he slipped away to the shelter's side room where he spent his mornings these days, writing grant applications, helping Maggie design flyers for fundraisers, sorting donated clothing by size. 30 minutes later, Maggie appeared in the doorway. They found it. She said, her voice unreadable. He looked up. Did they like it? She gave a short laugh. Zoe cried. Sadie inspected the screws. Ellie Googled how to use it. Leah drew a design for the cover. I'd say yes. Nate leaned back in the chair, breath escaping in something between relief and quiet joy. They want to show you something, Maggie added. He followed her down the hall and into the back room. The girls stood in a loose semicircle around the flower press. Zoe clutched a fresh daisy. Ellie held a pair of shears. The mood in the room was reverent like church, but warmer. Leah stepped forward. We're going to press our favorites and keep the best ones in a journal so we don't forget. Forget what? He asked, softly. Who gave them to us? Zoe whispered. Sadie cleared her throat. We voted. Nate's heart skipped. On whether or not you're weird. Ellie deadpanned. Final decision, kinda. They all burst into giggles. Then Ellie sobered, her voice quieter now. We also voted on whether we trust you. Nate's throat tightened. Zoe stepped forward and placed the daisy in his palm. We do. He looked down at the flower. The petals were uneven, a little bruised from being carried, but it was real. He swallowed. Thank you. Leah tilted her head. You okay? He nodded, just trying not to cry in front of 4 very observant 9-year-olds. Sadie shrugged. We've seen worse. Ellie crossed her arms. You gonna cry or you want to come with us to sell? I'll carry the buckets. The girls packed quickly, moving with the same practiced rhythm as always, but this time they left space for him in the middle. As they walked down the block, Zoe tugged gently on his coat sleeve. Do you think Mom will like the press? Nate looked down at her. I think she'll love it. Zoe's smile was small but steady. They reached the corner and the flower stand came to life. Ellie called out prices. Leah arranged the bouquets. Sadie watched the street. And Zoe leaned into Nate's side just for a moment, her head brushing his coat. It was barely a touch, barely a second, but it was everything. That night, Nate sat in his penthouse surrounded by silence. The press release for the Starlight Foundation's latest grant lay open on his laptop, but he couldn't focus. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out the daisy Zoe had given him that morning, pressed now between 2 sheets of printer paper, waiting for the real press to dry. He held it carefully, as if it might break with a breath. Then he pulled out a journal blank, bound in navy leather. On the first page he wrote, Day 1. She gave me a flower, and I remembered how to feel. He closed the book tomorrow. He would take another step, one daisy at a time. The marble floors of Bradford Tower gleamed beneath Claudia's heels, each sharp step a declaration of power. The lobby's silence broke only under her designer stilettos, a cadence of command and cold elegance. The concierge offered a deferential nod. The security desk didn't even glance up. She didn't check in. She never needed to. Claudia Bradford had built this tower as much as Nathaniel had, if not more. While he gave the company its face, she had given it its spine. And now it was slipping through her fingers like silk. 4 missed board meetings. An investor summit canceled with no explanation. Whispered rumors of a humanitarian focus. Claudia had heard the name Starlight one too many times in the past week to ignore it. And then confirmation. Audrey back released early. No longer the ghost Claudia had buried, but a woman resurrected. And those girls, those 4 mirror-eyed girls. She didn't knock when she stormed into Nathaniel's office. Where is he? She demanded. Diane, ever the gatekeeper, startled behind her desk. He's not in today. He's at an off-site visit. Claudia cut her off with a curled lip. Picking daisies with children again, is he? Diane didn't answer. She didn't need to. Claudia pivoted without waiting for further lies. She knew exactly where he was. With them. Those living reminders of everything Claudia had tried to erase. Back in the executive elevator, she stared at her reflection in the polished steel doors. She didn't look rattled. Not yet. Her platinum blonde hair was as precise as ever. Her tailored coat hugged her frame with silent authority. But her hands were clenched at her sides, white-knuckled beneath lambskin gloves. She reached her office on the 61st floor and locked the door behind her. On the desk, the folder awaited. Her investigator had delivered it personally. He knew better than to trust such things to email. She opened it slowly, hoping to find a mistake, a flaw, something to strike, a piece of leverage. What she found instead made her stomach twist. Audrey's prison letters, stacked and photocopied, were filled with nothing but love. Quiet updates for the girls, instructions for vitamins, homework, bedtimes. No mention of Nathaniel. No demands, no threats, no strategy. Just a mother writing, as if her heart was being torn in 4 pieces every single day. Claudia pressed a hand against the folder, as if it might stop the ache it stirred. She had underestimated her. She had underestimated them all. The girls had won Nate over. That much was clear. He was reorganizing assets, liquidating holdings to establish a Starlight Foundation. Worse, he'd quietly begun the guardianship process. If he succeeded, if Audrey returned fully to their lives, it wouldn't just be a disruption, it would be a dethronement. The carefully curated empire Claudia had ruled in the shadows through committees, backroom deals, and whisper-fed influence would collapse under the weight of their innocence. She stepped to the wall of glass behind her desk and stared out at the Manhattan skyline. To her, it had always looked like a chessboard one she'd mastered. She saw not lights and windows, but positions and pieces, power arranged in vertical geometry. Now it looked fragile. Below her, the city pulsed with noise and life. Somewhere down there, Nathaniel was carrying buckets of flowers instead of closing mergers, laughing instead of signing contracts. He had lost his mind, or maybe worse, he had found his heart. Her fingers curled into fists. This couldn't be allowed. She returned to the desk and pulled out another file. This one she hadn't shown her investigator. It contained sealed documents from a decade ago, medical evaluations, fertility consultations, the original letter she had convinced Dr. Whitman to clarify. She hadn't forged anything. She never needed to, just leaned in with concern. Phrased things carefully. It would be cruel to give him false hope. She had told the doctor Nathaniel doesn't handle ambiguity well. It was true. He never had. And so Audrey's miracle had been drowned in Claudia's suggestion of caution. It had worked, until now Claudia dropped the file beside the others. Time for whispers was over. She reached for her phone and dialed Judge Leland's office, said a young assistant on the other end. "Tell him Claudia Bradford is requesting a private meeting regarding a custody review." She said, her voice like velvet over ice. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up before the woman could respond. Next, she called her PR firm. "Prepare a draft statement." Something subtle concerned about Nathaniel's mental health, his overextension. "We'll lean on exhaustion, stress. Keep it quiet for now. Just prepare." And finally she called Richard. "I want all communications traced. Audrey's phone, Maggie Holloway's email, anyone tied to Starlight Shelter. I want a full profile on the financials of the foundation. If Nathaniel's transferring assets into a trust, we need to know who can challenge it." There was a pause on the other end. "Is this legal?" Richard asked carefully. Claudia smiled coldly. "What I'm asking is information. How it's acquired is your burden, just get it done." She ended the call and looked at the reflection of herself in the black glass of her office window. This wasn't about Audrey anymore, or even Nathaniel. This was about order, about the preservation of a name. The Bradfords had built more than just a company. They had constructed a legacy, and legacies weren't given. They were protected. Ruthless people kept the world spinning. Claudia wouldn't watch hers be dismantled by flowers and fairy tales. Not while she could still move a piece. Not while she still knew how to play the game. The walls of Dr. Lawrence Whitman's private fertility clinic were lined with soft, abstract artwork, meant no doubt to soothe anxious patients and soften sterile truths. But Nathaniel Bradford wasn't here for comfort. He was here for answers. He sat alone in the consultation room, its neutral tones doing little to calm the storm in his chest. A thin folder sat unopened on the table before him, its weight somehow heavier than its paper contents should allow. Whitman finally entered his tailored lab coat, hanging too neatly over his slumped shoulders. His hair was grayer than Nate remembered, but his eyes were the same precise, cautious, untrustworthy Nathaniel. He said with a rehearsed smile, "This is unexpected." "Is it?" Nate asked evenly. Whitman gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Please sit." Nate didn't move. "I'm not here for a checkup." The doctor nodded, lips tight. I assumed not. Nate tapped the folder with a single finger. "You told me 10 years ago that I was sterile, that I would never father a child. You didn't hedge. You didn't say low probability. You said impossible." Whitman didn't answer at first. He adjusted his glasses. "At the time, your results showed severely compromised fertility. The language may have overstated the condition." Nate's jaw clenched. "You didn't just overstate it. You destroyed my marriage with it." The silence stretched taut as piano wire. I need the original reports, Nate said flatly. The raw data, not summaries, not clarified findings. Every single test, every note. Dr. Whitman paled slightly but nodded. Give me a moment. He stepped out, leaving Nate alone with 1,000 pounding thoughts. A week ago, he wouldn't have dared hope. But now the daisy still drying on his windowsill said otherwise. So did the curve of Zoe's smile, the sharpness in Ellie's tone, the way Leah tilted her head when she thought the quiet ferocity in Sadie's stare. They weren't just girls with his eyes. They were him. Whitman returned 10 minutes later, a small box tucked under his arm. He set it on the table and slid it toward Nate. These are the originals. I didn't alter them. Just filtered what I believed was emotionally manageable. Nate didn't open the box. Did Claudia ever speak to you? He asked quietly. Whitman's throat bobbed. She reached out concerned. Said ambiguity would only make things worse for you, that a clean result would give you clarity. And did she suggest the wording? She phrased it as compassion. Whitman said, barely audible. She was persuasive. She said Audrey had been dishonest, that the marriage was unstable. And you took her word over mine. Over Audrey's? I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting her. Nate snapped. Whitman fell silent. Nate stood the folder in his hand. If this confirms what I already know in my gut that they're mine, I'll make sure a formal inquiry is opened. If not for malpractice, then for ethical breach. He paused at the door. And if there's a single note in here that suggests you misled me intentionally, I'll make sure the whole city knows it. Whitman didn't respond. He just sat, shoulders hunched, a man unraveling beneath the shadow of his own cowardice. The next morning, Nate walked through the sliding doors of a private DNA testing lab tucked discreetly off Park Avenue. The technician met him with no questions. Helena Kingsley had arranged everything confidential, secure, anonymous even to the staff. A cheek swab, fast and painless. The girls had given theirs under the guise of a fun science game. Maggie had coordinated with Helena's legal backing, ensuring it was all properly documented. Now all that remained was time. 2 days later, the results arrived. Nate sat on the edge of his bed, envelope in hand. His penthouse was silent, the skyline dimming beyond the tall windows. He took a breath and opened the envelope. 1 page, 3 lines, that changed everything. Paternity probability, 99. 9999% subjects. Ellie Leah, Sadie Zoe, biological father, Nathaniel James Bradford. He exhaled slow and shaking. They were his, all 4 of them. The paper slipped from his fingers as he covered his face, the pressure in his chest finally cracking open into something raw and quiet grief for what he'd missed. Awe for what he still had a chance to repair. The next morning he met Maggie at a quiet cafe not far from the shelter. She was already seated with a folder in front of her. Before you say anything, she said, pushing it toward him. You should see these. Inside were 24 envelopes, some still sealed, some marked return to sender, others with correction fluid over the addresses. All were addressed to him, to various Bradford Holdings addresses, all in Audrey's handwriting. She wrote to you for years, Maggie said, trying every office, every department. Some came back, some just disappeared. Nate felt sick. I never got any of these, he said hoarsely. Not one. She kept records, sent copies to her lawyer too, just in case Nate leafed through the letters. Each one a time capsule, a photograph here, a school report, a birthday card, a plea, a prayer, and then 1 note dated only a month after Audrey left. I know you don't believe me, but they are yours. All 4. I named them for the things I hoped they'd carry when I couldn't: strength, wisdom, beauty, and life. I will never stop trying to reach you. Maggie's voice was softer now. Victoria knew your sister was blocking everything. That's why she stopped trying. Victoria. Nate echoed. You call her that? She never stopped being real here. Not even when she was gone. Nate nodded slowly. then pulled another envelope from his jacket. The DNA test confirms it. He said, legally, officially, scientifically. He folded his hands. I want to take the next step. Maggie raised a brow. You want full custody. No, Nate said, I want shared custody. I want Audrey to come home and find a life waiting for her, one that she can own. Not just visit. Maggie studied him for a long moment. Then you'd better start preparing. Because if Claudia is half as ruthless as she used to be, she won't let this go. I know, Nate said. But I'm ready now. The storm returned, not with thunder, but with the soft vibration of a phone on a marble countertop. Nathaniel Bradford stood in his kitchen, the morning sunlight struggling to pierce the overcast sky that pressed against his floor-to-ceiling windows. The DNA results still lay open on the table, one sheet of paper with implications too vast to fit within its margins. His phone buzzed again. Claudia. He let it ring. Instead, he poured 2 mugs of coffee. One for himself. One out of habit for a presence not yet returned. Audrey. He couldn't stop imagining her holding those babies alone, exhausted, terrified. Couldn't unhear Zoe's tiny voice asking him to come the whole day. Couldn't unknow what the tests confirmed. He had let go of something irreplaceable, and he would never make that mistake again. He picked up the phone. Not Claudia's call, but a different one. A pre-scheduled time arranged by Helena Kingsley. A secure line patched through the prison phone system. Audrey. He inhaled, then pressed the button to accept the call. Nathaniel. Her voice, older, wearier, but unmistakably hers. Audrey. He said, his voice faltering slightly. I thank you for agreeing to talk. There was a pause, the sound of institutional silence filling the space between them. Helena told me you did the DNA test. I did. And she asked tight. They're mine. He said, Ellie, Leah, Sadie, Zoe. I knew it before the results came back, but now it's fact. Another long pause. I tried. Nate, Audrey said softly. For years. Letters, emails. I didn't want them to grow up believing they were mistakes. I know, he said. I've seen the letters Maggie showed me. She kept them. She kept everything. Audrey exhaled, emotion slipping into the sound. Then I know what I missed, what I denied. What I let Claudia convince me wasn't real. The use of her name thickened the air between them. She always hated me, Audrey said. But I never thought she'd go that far to block your mail, interfere with your diagnosis, manipulate a judge. She wasn't protecting me, she was protecting control. Legacy power, and I let her do it. You didn't want to believe me. No. Nate admitted, but I want to fix that now. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I haven't earned it, but I want to make a home for them, for you, not just shelter, not just food or gifts, real belonging. They don't know yet. Do they? Audrey asked. Not everything, he said. They've guessed. They see it. But I didn't want to tell them until I told you. She said nothing, the silence didn't sting. It settled like a pause before a full breath. I'm working with Helena to challenge your sentence. He added, we have evidence of bias. Campaign donations from Claudia to Judge Crawford. Enough to raise questions. We're filing for early release. Audrey was quiet, then barely above a whisper. Thank you. He swallowed. I wish I could undo the last 10 years. I don't want undoing. Audrey said, I want better. Going forward. Then a click. Time up. The line went dead. Nate sat in the quiet, the taste of her words still in the air. I want better going forward. Across town in Claudia Bradford's corner office, the storm gathered. Her assistant hovered in the doorway, uncomfortable. The private investigator you hired is online too. Finally, Claudia muttered, picking up the phone. Well, she asked. We got into the sealed files. Bennett's release appeal is gaining traction. Helena Kingsley's name is all over the case. And there's chatter. Bradford ordered DNA tests. Claudia's face turned to stone. And they came back. He's the father. All 4. The words hit her like a blow. He's planning custody, she demanded. Looks like it. and early parole for Bennett. They've got a paper trail linking you to Judge Crawford. Claudia stood slowly turning toward the window. She had underestimated Helena. She had underestimated Audrey's patience, and worst of all, she had underestimated Nathaniel's guilt. "All right," she said. "If this is going to court, we hit first." The investigator hesitated with what? Claudia's mind spun. "Leaks," she said coldly. "To the press. Anonymous tips. Audrey's prison sentence. The shelter. The fact that she raised children on the street. Make it look like Nathaniel's being manipulated. That he's making decisions based on guilt, not fact." "That's dangerous," the man said. "So is irrelevance," Claudia snapped. "Do it." Now that evening, as rain began to pelt the city, Nate met Helena at her office. She looked up from her desk with urgency in her eyes. "She's moving," Helena said. "We got wind of it this morning. Your sister is trying to smear Audrey preemptively." Nate swore under his breath. "She's trying to paint you as unstable, emotional, unfit to manage a corporation, let alone a family. If this escalates, we'll need to go public. I'm ready," Nate said. "No more hiding. If I have to choose between the company and my daughters, I choose them." Helena studied him. "Are you sure? I was a CEO for 20 years. I know how to fight. This time I'm fighting for something that matters." Helena handed him a signed set of documents. "Then let's start with this. Temporary joint custody petition. You and Audrey. It'll show the courts you're committed." Nate signed without hesitation. Back at the shelter, Maggie watched the girls sleep, 4 figures curled into mismatched beds, beneath mismatched quilts, identical and yet utterly unique. She turned as Nate entered the common room, soaked from the rain, but burning with something fierce and new. "It started," he said. "Claudia's attacking." "I figured," Maggie said. "What's next? We fight back," he said. "And when Audrey walks out of Rikers, I want her to walk straight into a future no one can take from her again." Maggie looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you'd better be ready for a storm." He met her eyes. "I already survived the worst of it," he said. "Losing them. I'm not losing them again." The rain returned with a vengeance that Sunday night. At Starlight Haven, the shelter's windows rattled as wind howled through the alleys, but inside the girls were tucked into their cots, warm beneath patchwork quilts. Ellie had stayed up reading. Leah hummed softly to herself, sketching flowers on the back of a flyer Sadie wrote in her weathered journal. Pages curled from steam and time, and Zoe was quiet. She'd found something. It had fallen behind a bookcase in Maggie's office, a small wooden box she'd never seen before. No label, no lock, just dust and a hinge, and inside, photographs one by one. Zoe pulled them out. A wedding photo, her mother in white, smiling beside a man with icy blue eyes and a younger face. Letters, some unopened, stamped, "Return to sender," hospital discharge papers, 4 birth certificates, each one with a name she recognized: Ellie, Leah, Sadie, Zoe, and a father's name typed neatly beneath: Nathaniel Bradford. Zoe stared. It wasn't shock that stilled her. It was recognition. Something she had already felt, already known deep inside. A quiet truth finally given voice. She didn't tell her sisters. Not yet. The next morning, as Nate helped the girls set up their flower stand under gray skies, Zoe watched him differently. She noticed the way he carried Sadie's heavy bucket without being asked, how his eyes softened every time Ellie spoke, how he crouched down to tie Leah's shoelace with the same reverence he gave to silk contracts. He was already theirs. He just hadn't said it. "Mr. Nathan," Zoe said, holding up one of the photos. "Why didn't you tell us?" Nate froze. The other 3 turned to see Zoe holding the wedding photo, their mother, their father. "Them. You found it," he said quietly. "You look like us," Sadie said. "You talk like Mom," Ellie added. "You are Dad, aren't you?" Leah asked. The moment held. Then Nate knelt down, his heart raw and voice steady. "Yes," he said, "I'm your dad. No fanfare, no long explanations. Just truth, tender and honest. I didn't know you existed for a long time," he continued. "When I did, I was afraid. Afraid I'd hurt you again, that I didn't deserve to be your father." The girls were silent. Then Ellie, always the strongest, crossed her arms. "You did hurt us." Nate nodded. "I know you hurt Mom." Sadie added, her eyes hard. "I know that too. But you came back," Leah whispered. Nate swallowed. "Yes, and I want to stay. If you'll let me." The wind swept a curl of Zoe's hair across her cheek as she stepped forward and took his hand. "Mom says forgiveness is for people who try again," she said. "Are you going to try?" He smiled through the sting in his eyes. "Every single day behind them." Maggie watched from the shelter doorway, tears shining like the rain clinging to the roof. That evening, while the girls slept, Nate stood in Maggie's office, a copy of Claudia's intercepted communications spread across the desk. "She paid Judge Crawford bribed the medical assistant to alter my fertility results. Had every one of Audrey's letters redirected or destroyed, Maggie's face was pale. And all this time, she's trying to block Audrey's release again, pushing the narrative that she's unstable, that I've been emotionally manipulated. What will you do?" "Fight," Nate said, "with everything I've got." The next day, the courtroom was half full as Audrey Bennett appeared before the judge for her early release hearing. Nathaniel sat in the gallery, not as a CEO, not even as a witness, but as a father. Helena stood and delivered the truth: a pattern of misconduct, a sister's campaign of sabotage, evidence of a loving mother punished beyond reason. The judge listened. The room was still. Audrey, when asked to speak, stood tall. Her voice was calm, her words unscripted. "I didn't steal for greed," she said. "I stole to feed my daughters. I would do it again, though. I pray I never have to. I've taught my girls courage, honesty, resilience. Now I want to raise them with dignity." She glanced at Nate. "And if their father wishes to help now, I won't stop him, but I will protect them, no matter what." The judge looked over his glasses. "Miss Bennett," he said, "you are hereby granted early release, effective immediately. Your record will reflect time served." The gavel fell. In the hallway outside, the girls waited, fingers clasped tightly together. And then the door opened. "Mom!" They cried, a harmony of joy and disbelief. Audrey dropped to her knees as four bodies wrapped around her. She buried her face into their tangled arms and cried, not the tears of a woman who had lost, but of one who had finally been found. Then she looked up. Nate stood a few feet away, hands trembling. She rose, slowly, walked to him and paused. "I never thought you'd be here," she said. "I almost wasn't," he admitted. "But I'm not going anywhere again." She studied him for a long beat. "Good," she said softly, reaching for Zoe's hand, "because they deserve everything." Spring settled over New York like a promise fulfilled. Soft breezes, blossoms unfurling on the trees, and sunlight that didn't just shine but warmed. In Central Park, laughter rang like wind chimes between the trees, and on the green, near the carousel, a birthday picnic unfolded beneath paper streamers and wildflower garlands. 4 identical cakes, 4 sets of candles, and 4 girls, turning 10 today, surrounded by new friends, shelter families, teachers, neighbors, and 2 people who had once believed they could never stand side by side again. Audrey Bennett adjusted the plates of cupcakes on a checkered tablecloth, a gentle smile on her lips. Her business. Bennett and Bloom had flourished in the past 6 months. Her floral arrangements, once wrapped in old newspapers and sold for $5 now, graced Park Avenue windows and boutique weddings. But this moment was her greatest arrangement. Yet, behind her, Nathaniel Bradford hoisted a handmade banner above the picnic tables. The letters curved in careful brush strokes. "Happy 10th birthday, Ellie, Leah, Sadie, and Zoe." When he climbed down from the ladder, he found Audrey watching him. "They look happy," she said, her eyes following the blur of blue dresses darting across the grass. "They are happy," he replied, voice steady with gratitude. "I don't think they've ever had a party before." "Not like this," Audrey said. Then after a pause, "Not with both of us here." He nodded, his expression humble, reverent. "Thank you for letting me be part of their world." You didn't ask, she said gently. You earned it. She gestured toward the playground where Zoe helped Leah fix her hair with a daisy chain, while Ellie directed a game of tag, and Sadie scolded a boy twice her size for cutting in line. They know what love looks like now, Audrey said, because you showed up. Nate swallowed hard. I just hope it's enough. It is. She said it's enough and it's real. From behind them came the excited shouts of children. Cake time, cake time. The girls rushed over breathless and glowing. Ellie reached for Nate's hand. You get the first piece, she announced. Leah tugged his sleeve. No, Mom gets the first piece, then you go first. Dad, Sadie insisted. Zoe laughed and threw her arms around them both. Everyone at the same time. As they each leaned toward their own cake, chocolate, lemon, strawberry, and vanilla with edible daisies, Audrey and Nate stood close behind, watching with full hearts as the girls closed their eyes and made 4 different wishes. And for the first time, none of those wishes needed to include the words, "Please come back." That night, the apartment Nate had bought for them was full of party leftovers and soft music. Balloons swayed from ceiling corners. Wrapping paper littered the rug. Ellie had fallen asleep on the couch. Leah curled up in her lap. Sadie was reading aloud to Zoe, who was already halfway to dreamland. Nate stood on the balcony looking out over the city that had once been his kingdom, but now simply felt like their home. Audrey joined him, arms crossed loosely against the breeze. You know, she said quietly, I used to dream that someday you'd find out, that you'd show up furious, heartbroken, determined to make things right. And then I stopped hoping, she admitted. Hope got too heavy. He turned to her. And now I think I can carry it again, she said. But only if you help. He smiled more deeply than he had in years. I will. Every day behind them, the soft sound of Zoe's voice floated out through the sliding door. I love our family. Even if it came late, Audrey closed her eyes, her hand brushing against his. Late didn't matter anymore. What mattered was now. What mattered was home. If this story left a mark on you, share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you the longest? Rate it from 0 to 10 and tell us why it hit home. And if you believe in stories that heal, redeem, and transform, subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss the next chapter. Your next unforgettable journey is waiting. Just click the video on your screen now.